Good morning, everybody. Welcome to A Paycheck Away, where we focus on how we are a paycheck away from poverty, from homelessness, from losing food and all that awfulness because our safety net is broken. So, we are joined today in our series of All Eyes on Virginia with Shane Boswell, who is a candidate for House of Delegates right here in Virginia. And this is the final few days. It's the final few days before the election. And so we are very thankful to Shane for stopping in to chat with us about his campaign and how it's looking. So, Shane, welcome.
Absolutely, Salaam. And thank you for having me on. And it is crunch time, but uh, uh, food insecurity is a huge thing that is a concern to me, especially in my district. We're pretty rural. And any opportunity I have to discuss that and what is on the minds of folks rather than a bunch of divisiveness, always going to take time.
Yeah, tell us a little bit about your district. Where is it in Virginia?
So I'm actually from just south of your district. I was born in Chesterfield County. And made the rounds, lived a little bit in North Carolina, and now I'm up here in HD 31, which is just east of Winchester, almost in West Virginia. So, we're boundaried on the east side by the Shenandoah River and the Appalachian Trail. The west side is the Shenandoah Valley, I-81, major trucking corridor. We've got the Virginia Inland Port up here. You've got the town of Front Royal in Warren County, which is where Avtex used to be after World War II. It's one of the largest Superfund sites on the East Coast now. And it's a mix of very rural horse, cattle, and soybeans, and also big logistics distribution facilities because of our proximity to 8166. We're about an hour from the hour and a half from the nation's capital. So a lot of throughput. And all the good jobs are over the mountain. It's really hard to build and prosper here. I'm not a big fan of campaign slogans, but we use the phrase live here, work here, grow here as a tenet, right? We want to make sure that folks can afford to live here. They can afford to buy homes here. They can afford to raise a family here. That they can find good jobs here in the valley and not have to leave either because they can't afford to buy a home here, or they can't afford food here, but also because we want those jobs here rather than on the other side of the mountain.
Right now, you mentioned soybeans, and that's a hot topic right now. And Trump just signed a deal with China, which meant best deal. But is this something that you have spoken with farmers who are farming soybeans and what they're going through?
Yeah, so there are we tend to see a good bit of multimodal. We don't have a lot of the great big factory farm style where you have 4 or 5 thousand acres in a single commercial crop and monocrop. We do have rotational soybeans. You'll have field corn. You'll do winter wheat rotating through. And the big concern here is the uncertainty, right? A bad deal is better than no deal at all, but uncertainty is worse than a bad deal. And when you're trying to decide what to plant, whether those subsidies are going to be in place if you plant and you lose a crop, all of those things weigh on folks' minds. My parents had a small business in Colonial Heights, and they ended up selling that and moving to my grandparents' farm down in North Carolina and tried to make a go on 140 acres. You can't farm on a. Let me be very careful about how I phrase this. It is very, very challenging to make a living, and no one can afford health insurance farming 140 acres. And so, with my mom's rheumatoid arthritis, my dad had to work, mom had to work, trying to balance all that stuff out. I enlisted after 9/11 and wasn't around it wasn't free labor, but it was definitely very, very economical labor. And it wasn't sustainable. So they ended up having to sell that. And I am very empathetic to the plight of family farms. It's a big issue up here in maintaining our rural character while still also growing because if we don't find a way to grow responsibly, we're going to get overrun. Frederick County, where Winchester City is one of the fastest growing population centers in the state of Virginia. And the population is booming. They're trying to figure out where we're going to put these houses. where folks are going to work. It's an ongoing challenge, and it's a 5 to 10 year problem.
Got it. Now, there's also a big problem across all of Virginia of data centers popping up. Is that something that's affecting y'all too?
So I like to remind folks that most of these districts, especially when you get out here, are multiple population centers. So uh, we have Clark, Warren, and Frederick, and each county has a slightly different approach to data centers specifically, but industrial, let's call it industrial and commercial infill. Clark County in particular is the smallest of the three counties, is around 14 or 15,000 people in the entire county. And they have a significant portion of the county locked down in conservation easements. Clark County is in a snow globe. And they've, if that's your long term development plan, they've done a very good job protecting that character of this tiny county. As we've got Jefferson County to the north of us in West Virginia. Like I mentioned, Frederick is growing. Frederick is more, uh, uh, obviously, they have the largest population center in Winchester City, and they do have a little bit more industrial stuff. You've got some concrete facilities that actually feed production pieces into those data centers in Northern Virginia. And then Warren County had Avtex, now has a bunch of logistics facilities, and the inland port is right there at the geographical center of the district. But there's no real long term plan for where those workers are going to work as those facilities automate. So back to data centers, everybody has a slightly different look on it. Nobody wants one in their backyard. And to be fair, I work in the data center business, right? I'm a chief engineer, I'm a program manager. And so my job is to make sure that when we do maintenance on equipment, that we're regulatory compliant. And so my portfolio is everything from medium voltage down to stormwater management. I don't decide where they get built. And that's a common attack that my opponent has tried to bring up against me. But look, we all want infrastructure jobs. I work in an infrastructure job with no college degree. I've managed to do okay for my family. That doesn't mean I want a data center in my backyard. That's a local decision. And we need to make sure that county supervisors and zoning commissions have as much information as possible, that it's factual information, and that there are teeth to if they're given incorrect information. So I always come back to HB 1601, which was a bill that passed out of the House of Delegates earlier this year. It was vetoed by Glenn Youngkin, that basically codified all of the information that a large energy producer or consumer would need to provide in order to have that zoning conversation. Everything from power usage, water usage, wastewater management, what sort of traffic and noise they're going to produce, all of those things. And um, my opponent voted against it, but she's also taken $19,000 from Dominion. And so, I don't want to tell folks, yes, you do want a data center here, or no, you don't want a data center here. I want to give them the information because I trust my voters.
Right. No, that's great. That's solid. And thank you for providing that background. Um, Now, you mentioned at the top of the interview about food insecurity. What's poverty like in your district?
Um, it's rural poverty is a little bit different in that you have a broad swath of the population that is at or a tick below poverty line, that will never admit to themselves that they are below poverty line, right? When you hear folks talk about expanding rural broadband, those are the folks that we're trying to get help for, because they can't afford to put gas in their car to drive to Martinsburg to go to a VA appointment, but they could absolutely do an online appointment. Um, this is actually this board right here. I don't know if you've seen this on anything. This is my Hey Richmond board.
Okay.
And my wife and I were talking earlier today. I started running in February, and we've had around 450 public facing events where I've gone and met folks at county commissioner or county supervisors meetings, town council meetings, school board meetings, tractor pulls. And I take this board with me. and a bunch of sticky notes. And I say, tell me what matters to you. What's something that you wish Richmond knew about your community? What's something that you want to tell them they need to fix or that you're proud of? And this is from my most recent poll, but I've got it all here in a notebook
Oh,
that I
wow.
carry around with me. And I have one up there from Abigail. I've got one in here from Jay Jones. I've got one from Ghazala Hashmi in here. Every time I see them, I'm like, look, these are the voices of my voters. And I see, like I said, I'm kind of a TPM by trade now, and
And
I'm
TPM,
trying to
what does TPM mean?
so technical program manager. So it's project management, program management, and I own essentially what is operational excellence. Making sure that field technicians, when they're coming into work on equipment, if they show up with 10 fingers, 10 toes, that's what they go home with. And I've been able to use some of those techniques to gather anecdotes from the field, right? From potential voters, from constituents, and folks that feel like they have never had their voice heard, and give them an avenue to tell me what's on their mind. And I'm seeing things in here from sidewalk improvements in small towns. Common sense has come up here on the board multiple times, and it's got check marks over and over and over again. But you specifically asked about poverty, and I see folks concerned about Medicaid. I see folks concerned about food costs, preserving funding for social services, and I see a lot of support and protect our social safety nets in here. Nobody that I've really spoken to has come to me and said, "I have this problem, and I want it fixed for me."
Mm.
What I hear is my neighbor has this problem. My sister has this problem. My cousin is struggling with this. They go down. So with food insecurity, what I have done, and looking through your profile and kind of your focus there, um, is I've committed to donating 10% of all of my campaign funds back out into the community. Right. I could run one more TV ad, or we're a small campaign. We're going to end up pulling in around $45,000 over the course of the entire thing. I would much rather give that $4,500 to food banks um, that are struggling but are actively out helping folks. And so I've been making the rounds, dropping off checks, asking folks how I can help. And I was at CCAP Winchester today, and CCAP is the Congressional Community Action Project. There's one in Winchester, there's one in Warren County, and then there's a couple more farther on down the valley. And they have this year given food out to almost 2,700 unique households and 8,600 people. Um, they give out clothing. They do financial counseling and support, right? They consider themselves a band aid. They can't fix the underlying structure, but they're starting to see furloughed government employees come in for the first time. And they're seeing folks that have had other sources of food all of a sudden have nowhere else to turn. And a lot of folks are seeing these Medicare increases and going, I have to decide between getting treatment and feeding myself. I'm always going to feed my kids. I won't eat today. That's what poverty looks like out here.
So, if elected, what's your policy priorities once you're in Richmond?
Mm. So this, I've got this, I've got 25 or 30 different things that I want to fix. But if I had to stack rank them, we're bleeding teachers and public safety officials, firefighters, sheriffs, deputies over the mountain into Loudoun County. No offense to Loudoun County, they've got a lot of folks over there, Fairfax County. But when I get out here on the road, I work in Herndon every day, and I drive through Northern Virginia to get to work.
Oh, wow.
And
And is
that's a
that a
whole
common
other story.
commute? Is that a common commute for people in the district going in?
Oh yeah, yeah. My commute is about half of what a lot of the folks I work with. My commute's 38 miles each way. It's about an hour in the mornings. as long as nobody's hit a bear, right? Or a couple different deer on the top of the mountain. We do have to drive past the Appalachian Trail on the way up, but it's folks are working outside the district. Now I'm bringing my money back to the district, and that's good, but that's not the same as being able to live here and work here. Um, I'm living here and we're growing here. I want to be able to work here, and so um, it's figuring out, traffic calming is a big one. How do we move more folks? I'm a huge public transit fan. When I'm not running for office, I drive across the mountain to Harmony, which is about 12 miles from me. I catch a bus with it's Loudoun County Transit, but I can use my Metro card. And I take the bus to the train. I get on the train in Loudoun County at Loudoun Station in Ashburn, and then I take the train 4 stops to work, and then I ride my bike the rest of the way. It takes about an hour and a half instead of a 55-minute drive. But it,
Car to a bus to a train to a bike.
four months each way. But
Wow.
it's really, you meet the most interesting people on buses. You really do. And it's really good to get some fresh air. And I do it all 4 seasons. So, you get in the habit of, okay, I can only pedal so hard or I'm going to be sweaty all day at work. Or I have to pedal harder because I'm going to freeze to death otherwise.
Mhm.
But, it coming back to, I mentioned how hard it is for folks to get to medical appointments and things like that. We've got some private run, nonprofit style support transit, non emergency care and transportation services out here. But none of our public transit systems out here in these rural areas are particularly well funded. And a lot of this traffic that I was at an I-81 conference yesterday, and a lot of the traffic that Virginia Department of Transportation is trying to deal with is what I consider through traffic. It's folks coming from Warren into Northern Virginia, or from Frederick into Northern Virginia, myself, Clark into Northern Virginia, from Jefferson County, where they're building thousands of new homes and they're cheaper, down into Clark and then across on roads that are made to handle, 10 or 15,000 cars an hour. And so we get backups, we get congestion. If I could go a mile west instead of 10 miles east and get on a bus and have it take me to the metro and not have to and cut out one transit out of that, that'd be fantastic. I think there's opportunities for that. And it would save us a lot of money in the long run. So public transit and tying in the rural areas into that is a thing that I want to solve. Um, some of the other things are making sure that our public schools are well funded. We have a what's called a COCA drop off, where basically the areas around DC get a certain amount of subsidy from the state to be able to compete with the metropolitan area. Well, as these school districts have grown, and they've been some of the best school districts in the nation, they've gotten larger. They're able to fund their teachers more, and then you see this massive drop off in support per head, essentially, as soon as you cross out of Loudoun into Clark County. And Clark is suffering, Warren is suffering, and Frederick in particular, again, one of the fastest growing counties in the country right now, is having to fight to pay teachers, trying to fight to keep teachers in house that they've grown that can go make $5,000 or more, 5,000 more a year, $10,000 more a year working in Loudoun County. And when you're talking about your most experienced teachers, the ones that, their top 3 salary years count towards their retirement, those folks that are the most skilled, the most dedicated, and have been doing it the longest, have the most to teach, new teachers are moving into these higher funded districts because they can get an extra 20, 30,000 a year
Mm.
in their top 3, and then they retire, and then they come back here, which is great. We want to have them here, but we'd like to be able to keep them here.
That's interesting because like the Loudoun County housing market is just out. It's not worth that extra 20, 30. You're not making out
No,
unless
well,
they
they're
have.
living here and working in Loudon,
Oh,
which I
okay.
get.
Okay.
I live here and I work in Hungary.
Got it.
And that's part of that live here, work here bit that, yeah, we need to make sure that we have more jobs available, especially my oldest son is 20 and he works across the border in Wood, West Virginia at Procter and Gamble. He makes slippers, right? He works on the line that at industrial manufacturing. He comes home smelling like Gain and Febreze and stuff like that, which is pretty nice for a 20-year-old, right? Um, but to find something that can pay his bills, he's got to drive across the state. He's got to leave the immediate area because there's not a really a good long-term development plan. And we're at this inflection point where this section of the valley is going to have to decide what we want to look like in 5 to 10 years.
So when it comes to like, you're part of the Brave 27. I call them the Brave 27 because,
Yeah, we call ourselves the Challenger Caucus, but I like Brave 27.
and I say Brave 27 because you made the decision in February to run, and this is an R plus what district?
28 ish, 25 ish.
So for folks who are watching who are not hip to that terminology, it just means it's a very strongly Republican held area.
Mm-hmm.
When Shane made the decision, it was a very different country that we lived in. Following, a lot of political violence that has happened, a lot of rhetoric and awful things happening over the past few months, Shane is now part of the Brave 27 who are continuously exposing themselves in public as a candidate, and being courageous and confident in their ability to run for office. So it's really phenomenal to see such bravery, Shane. So I really commend you for sticking to it and being out there, especially when so many people are just not critically thinking and just jumping to violence on all sides of the political spectrum.
Yeah, it's look. I mentioned that I enlisted after 9/11, right? I'm a combat vet. I deployed to Balad, spent time in Iraq. I've seen how fast sectarian violence can turn a neighborhood inside out.
Mm.
And that brings me to, you're running for House of Representatives. And I want to take a minute and I want to put a pin in something for you on your board. I have seen what the United States military is good at, and I have seen what it's not good at.
Mm-hmm.
The United States military is very good at two things. It's good at killing people and taking ground. It is not a police force. It is not designed to go into neighborhoods and leave things better than we found them. And the National Guard is a slightly different story in that they have a lot of, we responded to Katrina, right? And there are things that the National Guard could probably do, especially the Virginia National Guard if it stayed in Virginia. What we don't want is the Virginia National Guard being activated and sent into other states that did not invite them. And we don't want other states' National Guards coming here without an express invitation of a governor. So I always want to mention that I have seen what the United States military does very, very well. And I do not want them doing that well in our communities.
Amen to that. And that's a really good, like, trimmed down version of really what the U.S. is good at. I want that happening here. So it's an R plus, what do you say, 28?
Yeah, 25 to 27. It depends. Tim Kaine can do 18.
Okay.
Right. When Tim Kaine's on everybody loves Tim Kaine. But generic Democrats are going to do 25.
Got it. Now, this is a really interesting time in American history where costs are out of control, and these costs can be tied to Trump and what he's doing with tariffs
Directly.
SNAP and Medicaid, the big beautiful bill. So, what are you hearing from people? Are they feeling like they've been betrayed? Are they going to maybe switch their vote?
So we have a couple different things going on here in this area, and I have made it a point to. I know the area I'm running in, right? I know that if I'm standing in a crowd of 100 of my neighbors, 10 of them are probably going to be Democrats. 25 of them are going to consider themselves Republicans, and then everybody else just wants to survive.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And but what I run into is I go out of my way to be everywhere, to listen to everyone. That's one of the neat things about this board. I tell folks, they go, I'm going to write something you're not going to like. And I go, great. That's what I want. Right. So when I go through this book, I see, you know, there's nothing in here particularly about Trump. What I have seen in here is folks that are concerned about, Democrats taking all their guns. I get it. Look, I'm a combat vet. I live in the sticks. Let's go hunt. Let's go shoot some skeet. Let's go to the range. Let's be responsible gun owners
Mhm.
and have a conversation about how we can not leave tools where children can get at them. And if we can have that conversation, we can solve pretty much anything, right? That's been a message that has penetrated here. Um, I see some support for the farm bill in here. There's a lot of concern about AI out here, which is kind of surprising considering how rural we are. But folks are seeing layoffs. They're seeing the Doge cuts, and we do have a pretty good bucket of federal employees that commute into DC or remote work that have been affected by Doge cuts and are now furloughed. Um, uh, so CCAP was telling me that they've had their first furloughed federal employees come in the last 2 days, right? And so that affects folks. And so one of the other kind of policy priorities I want to have is making sure that we're codifying keeping a human in the loop.
Yeah.
And that seems to resonate with folks. Nobody wants a computer making a decision about your health care, about your hiring status, your eligibility for benefits. And that's not political. That's not, left versus right, red versus blue. That's, as a person, I don't want a computer grading my kids' assignments and determining whether they qualify for a job or not, whether they're going to get into college or not. I want to have somebody that I can have a conversation with, escalate to, and understand. So that, we can always, I tell folks I've been married 21 years, right? Um, my wife held down the fort while I was deployed. She held down the fort while I was running field service. She's given me three beautiful boys. And if she agrees with 60% of what comes out of my mouth on any given day, I'm having a very, very good day. But we find a way to sit down, find things that we can agree on. We kind of set aside the things we know we're going to disagree on, and we focus on solving how do we get the homework done? How do we put food on the table? How do we get the bills paid? And when you approach it out here from okay, I get it. We're being told to dislike each other, but I don't like to be told what to do.
Mhm.
And you don't like to be told what to do. So let's sit down and prove the national media wrong and find solutions. Um, folks, folks
So,
warm up.
in the last 20 seconds here, tell the viewers what they should do. Like, how can they support your campaign?
Um, tell your friends to vote. Tell your family to vote, and listen to folks when they tell you what they're hurting about. Folks generally feel unheard. They feel like government doesn't care about them, doesn't want their input. And if you've never run for office, go run. Run for county supervisor, run for school board. Do something that scares you. There's never a right time. There's only today.
That's right. That's right. Well, our guest today was Shane Boswell, who is a candidate for the House of Delegates, who is in the final few days before the election. So we're gonna let him go get more post-its on that board, and go meet the people, man. All the best, bro.
Appreciate it, man.